Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. Today's episode is sponsored by Costumes Rental Corporation. Today's guest is an award-winning and critically acclaimed costume designer for film and television, born in Toronto. In 2015, she completed her first feature film as a costume designer in Stella McGee's Gene of the Joneses, which premiered at South by Southwest. The film was also screened at the Nantucket Film Festival, TIFF, and the Zurich Film Festival. Following success of Gene of the Joneses, she continued her ongoing creative collaboration in 2017 on MGM and Warner Brothers' Everything Everything, a film adaptation of Nicola Yoon's New York Times best-selling novel of the same name. In 2021, she won the CAFT-CAD Award for her work on Blumhouse's The Craft Legacy, which was a reboot of The Craft. Her most recent work can be seen in Paramount's Scream 6, starring Courtney Cox, Jenna Ortega, and Hayden Panettiere, as well as in Netflix's upcoming series, Painkiller, which will be released on Netflix and stars Matthew Broderick, Uzo Aduba, and Taylor Kitsch. Without further ado, please welcome award-winning costume designer Avery Plewes to the Designing Hollywood Show. Avery, good to see you again. I wanted to sort of ask you, and we delved into your past and how you became a costume designer the last time you were on the show, but I wanted to ask you, how do you feel? Obviously, we're recording this in the midst of a dual strike that hasn't happened in a long time. The Writers Guild is on strike, and SAG and AFTRA is on strike. Where are you at in terms of the industry as a whole? How do you feel about what's going on?
I think this is a very big turning point culturally for us as an industry. And I think a lot of people are fed up with how the industry has changed significantly, and that our contracts have not changed to reflect the Silicon Valley of it all being involved in our industry. So, I think it takes a lot of courage to go on strike and stand up to these massive corporations and demand what they're worth, what we're worth. And I think it's good. I'm in support of what they're asking for, particularly as an artist, and also the AI of it all. I come from a family of artists, and AI is a threat to all of us. So, I think there's a time and place for it, but I think it needs to be regulated in an industry that's art. And I think, the way it's being run right now is not a reflection of that so much. So yeah, that's sort of how I guess I feel about it.
Well, no, I was telling a friend of mine, there was recently these AI trailers posted, like people were proof of concept trailers. And there's a lot of people that are, oh, look at what we can do with AI, look what artists can do. And one of the things that struck me about, only because I've been doing this podcast for so long, is everything that was in these trailers was all scraped from the internet, scraped from existing materials. And all the actors are clad in very elaborate costumes. And the costumes, the thing that struck me first, just seeing these images of non-existent people in non-existent costumes, was if people become used to this, all the where these non-existent people, the costumes they're in, the rooms they're in, the props that they're interacting with, all of that stuff is all stuff that needs to be designed by people that work on films, and much less the people themselves aren't even real in these movies, these AI generated things. And it's very real, and there's a lot of people going, we'll be able to, one person will be able to create a story. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't think it's as easy to create really compelling drama as a lot of people think. And especially, go ahead. Sorry.
I think maybe, you will be, but it will lack the soul that we as creative people bring to a project. And I think that's what a lot of people are forgetting. Like, AI doesn't have life experience, which
it hasn't had its heart broken.
Yeah. It's plagiarism software, really, is what AI is, in my opinion.
No,
Uh,
I totally agree with you. I mean, it's sort of disheartening because one of the fun things about watching, I think one of the appeals of watching movies is that we have an innate understanding that what we're watching, you're watching real people performing in what is essentially, because everything you see on screen, movies are fake, none of it's real, but it all
yeah,
has to be created by people. So everything from the camera angle itself, which was decided upon by a director of photography and a director and his entire crew or her entire crew, hanging lights, putting up flats and or screens or flags and making sure the shadows are perfect, to the production designer creating the prop guys or girls or them, and all these people that work on movie sets are responsible for everything that you see in the frame. And when you even get a single image that's designed by AI, it's just scraping all this stuff that other people have already done. And it might be mixing and matching in some kind of amalgamation, but it's still, like you said, it's still stealing.
yeah,
A human being didn't choose that shade of red or blue or green. The AI did, randomly. And to me, that's a bunch of people that just lost their jobs.
yeah,
And
for
it's a
sure.
bummer.
Well,
But
even just, I think a lot about the costume design process and approvals.
mm,
Um, and, a lot of times, and I think the industry as a whole is becoming a lot more designed by committee, working with certain studios, and sometimes, a distributor and the studio making the project will get involved. And, it feels like there are more and more people piping in on what a costume should be.
right.
One of the things that I keep thinking about is, you'll get the odd time where you get a producer or, a studio exec who are like, well, what about this in blue? And I keep thinking, is there going to be a day where they just put fitting photos into a software and say, turn this blue? And then you and the actor don't have, the sort of the nuanced bond of creating a costume and a fitting, and the studio just goes, oh, we like it in blue, please make it in blue. Like, that's sort of where my mind has been going about it all. That might be completely illogical, but
I don't
it's
think it's
a,
illogical at all. I think that's exactly right.
yeah, so that's a concern of mine. And there's a really sort of magical moment that happens in fittings when the actor sees the character in the mirror for the first time. And I think, AI can't really trump that. That's the nuance and the emotion that the actor then brings to screen. So yeah, it's also just, we didn't get into this industry to work with AI. So I think that's why a lot of people are kind of disheartened by it. It's not why we're all here.
No, and I think one of the most dangerous things is already everybody thinks if they watch movies, they know how to make movies. I mean, I've been dealing with
Yeah.
that for the last 30 years. And making movies is storytelling, and nowadays I think people know less about the art of storytelling itself, characterization, plot, because people don't read enough anymore. And all
No.
storytelling sort of comes out of literature. It's a literary based. It starts with the written word, and if you're not, I think, a fan of the written word, you don't have innately what it takes to make a story, or to understand what makes a story work. And I think that you and everybody that works on, especially costume designers and actors, as you just pointed out, when you help an actor find a character, like when they see themselves in the mirror dressed the way you've dressed them, and they can respond and start to inhabit a role. That's why I've always said that the hair and makeup teams on movies are such vital hires, because they're the actor's first line of defense to create the character. When they walk out on stage, they want to know they look great, and they don't have to worry about their costume or their makeup or their hair, because it's been done, it's been created, it's been curated, and so they can go out and inhabit that character. And that's what we want to see. I don't think people are going to want to watch AI people, artificial people, play out
No.
in a romance. You want to know that if you're watching Pretty Woman, that Richard Gere and Julia Roberts, those beautiful people, are actually there.
Yeah, for
You know.
sure.
Well, that said, you worked on Scream 6 since the last time we talked. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, jumping into a franchise like that, a long run. I mean, it's crazy that we now have franchises like Mission Impossible or Scream that are a quarter century old. You know, I thought that only like the Bond franchise would be, but Scream, and now that you jump into it, that movie was very successful.
It was, yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
what was that like for you? What was it like getting that job? First of all, how'd you get the job? And were you intimidated coming into the franchise?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Scream has the most passionate fan base.
Yeah,
So I was definitely intimidated. I did, Matt and Tyler directed it, who did Ready or Not. So they asked me to come back and work with them. And it was an immediate yes, because I love them. And, the nice thing about that movie is the studio, because they had done 5, were already pretty trusting of Matt and Tyler. And
right.
so I didn't feel, too much like I felt trusted, I guess, is the long and short of it all, with the design work I did. And yeah, it was great. I mean, there's something to be said about working with someone you've worked with before, being able to predict what they'll want. Sometimes you try things with an actor and they want a certain thing, and in the back of my head, I'm always willing to try, but in the back of my head, I'm like, they're going to want this shoe or they're going to want that. And then lo and behold, when you're going through the approval process with them, that's what they pick. So that was really great. And yeah, it just felt like I was making a movie with my friends, which is, I think, everyone's goal when they get into this business, to make cool stuff with your friends. So
Well, it's cool.
yeah.
I mean, it's a real vote of confidence when a directing team, which is unusual, but after you've worked with somebody successfully, and Ready or Not has great costumes, and also, when you have characters that have to be in those same costumes because the movie's in a compressed
Yeah.
compressed time, you have to be. It has to probably it's doubly difficult because they have to look good in this
For a
single
long
costume for the entire movie. So, how do you, when you're working with, now that you've worked with these directors of yours more than once, what is the kind of relationship that a costume designer develops with a director? Is there directors? Is there a shorthand? Do you guys develop your own language? Do you sort of, like you said, you knew which you could anticipate what designs they would pick out? How does that work? How does that relationship develop? Do they trust you, or do they micromanage you, or do you have to take things to them all the time or bring them ideas? How does it work?
No, they're like so trusting, to the point of like, well, what do you think? What's your favorite? Which is such a luxury. And I think also I know with them the things that excite them most, like Blood Day. Whenever we start adding blood to the costumes, that's when they're like kids in a candy store. And then yeah, I mean, I go in pretty like, this is what I want to do. This is, I like to really hash out an identity for each character, a palette early on. And, this is what I want to do. Show me the silhouettes and the certain items on this mood board that you respond to well. And they always tend to they like the grittier and the grungier, real feeling stuff. But, one thing about Scream and a franchise movie is it is a studio film, and studios tend to like things to feel a bit more glossy. So for us, it was always finding the balance between the two. And then with them, like I have a group chat with them. I talk to them all the time. And when you have a working relationship with someone like that, I think when you first meet a director or you're doing a project for the first time with a director, often there's like a very sort of, got to schedule a meeting with their assistant to talk about this or that. And for instance, the subway scene, which was my child on that film. I was so passionate about that scene, and all the time I'd have ideas because we didn't shoot it till we had a lot of time to prep that, which is great. But all the time I'd see an idea and I just text them and be like, I think this would be really cool, or what about this? And they, would. It also, I think, from a collaborative standpoint, when you have that shorthand, you often build upon each other's ideas and you get your best work because you're both kind of just fearless because it's a safe space to have stupid ideas and good ideas and figure out what the winning idea is. And it's not a contest and there's no ego involved in that way. It's like they trust me because they know that I have their best interest at heart, and I trust them because I know that they respect me. And so I think that's when your best work sort of comes out, is when there's that trust and that sort of, how can we push things to their absolute limit?
Right. And well, it obviously shows. Now in Scream 6, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, even though it's been out. But there's an antagonist, there's a pretty interesting, I really like the whole, I guess, call it a museum to the Scream franchise in a way. You could call it that, I guess.
We called it the museum.
You did. Okay, so you did. What was that like? And when you get to develop an antagonist for a franchise like a Scream, where did you begin with that process?
I mean, the museum, I had an assistant who just worked on that stuff because technically that would be art department because it's set deck, but it's so costume specific.
Yes.
And I think 99.9% of those costumes were reproduction. And I'm so specific and detail oriented that I wanted everything to feel as real texturally as possible. And I think you also see more and more these days where studios put on displays or reproduce museums like that for the public to like walk through and see. And I was like, if we don't get this right and this Tatum shirt is in some display and the fabric is wrong, I mean, Twitter's just gonna like tear a strip off of me. And also that's one of my, like, the things I love about costume design is finding the truth in the fabric, right? Like finding the original or the closest thing to it, because to me that's the story.
Right.
So yeah, I had an assistant and we went through the 5 previous movies over and over and over again, and just got as many things right as possible. So yeah, tons and tons of research. And also the Scream fan base is so thorough in their research. They kind of did a lot of the work for me. It was great. So yeah, that's where we started. And I started with the museum, and it became very apparent very quickly that I needed a person just on the museum because, the top story bomber that's worn, we had to get that embroidered. There were so many little neon or sort of minute details, but there were hundreds of items in that one scene. So
right.
There were a lot of logistics involved, and not everything could be resolved at the embroidery shop. There were lots of different vendors involved. So Oh, yeah.
Well, also sort of moving the franchise to a new location. You're in. It was funny. I don't know why I always thought this, but I remember in the Friday the 13th franchise, Jason takes Manhattan, and that was and unfortunately, he didn't take Manhattan the way I think we all wanted him to take Manhattan. But I mean, I think this really made an interesting use of a city. The idea of moving it out of the small town and putting it into a city. Did that, I mean, in terms of the way everybody else was dressed, more of an urban feel or more of what was that like for you? And obviously there's definitely a time difference, when Courtney Cox comes back, there's a lot of time that's passed in this franchise. So when you were coming up with things for her character, for instance, did you take into account like the hell that her character's been put through over the last 2 decades? Did that inform her clothing choices? Like, was that fun to do? And
Not really. I mean, I feel like Gail Weathers is in full denial of reality. She's not on Planet Gail. She just wants to look good. Is my Gail takeaway. I mean, I definitely used, I think, designers. I used Christopher John Rogers for her blue suit, which is a New York-based designer. Everything felt very high-end for her. I mean, most of her costumes have always been, but I didn't really approach her too differently for New York just because she's kind of always been pretty fabulous.
Yeah, that's right.
And I really don't, I mean, I think she really does not, she's such a survivor that she's just like, move on. Is kind of my interpretation of Gail. But yeah, in terms of the landscape, definitely the cast, I felt like, and the guys wanted to kind of upgrade them in terms of they've matured a bit, they're in a new city, they want to present a little bit more cultured. And then something that was very deliberate for me was the background was very generic until you get to the subway, because for me the subway is like the pin drop, the arc of intensity in the story, and then you sort of get more of a scope of where you are. And it's also Halloween, so the creepier costumes are on the subway, and you see more creepy costumes as you sort of go along in the story, which you wouldn't see probably as much in a small town, especially because there's not a subway there. But,
right.
Yeah.
And then obviously with a city, you've got more extras and background, and did that prove to be problematic, or was that just par for the course?
No, not at all. I mean, I had so much fun with the extras on this project because, I think so many people always want the extras to sort of fall into the background and disappear. And I just find that as a concept so boring and
right.
Not real. I love when you see like a real character-y person in the background. It feels less distracting to me.
Yeah.
Because it's a human being in what you would hope is a human story.
And it does give you texture, and flavor.
Totally. Yeah.
And because the kind of movie you're making, because it was horror, you can probably get away with doing things that if you were making a movie about Wall Street, even in terms of extras, that you wouldn't. It's not just people in suits,
It's every walk of life, and everyone's a suspect. That was a big thing too, right? So it's like you want the people that feel, some people who are creepy, some people who feel way too friendly, some people who feel like your typical New Yorker. So I had a lot of fun with it. And I think Ingrid, who did the background for me on that project, a lot of designers just want the most generic thing possible. And I think I confused her a bit when we first started, because I was constantly like pushing it, and no, I want a jacket on someone that you'll notice. I want that texture.
And the movie, I think, is better for it. Mean, I think it becomes, like you said, everyone's a suspect. And in a Scream movie, you're kind of always aware, like you're looking at everybody. Which
you're hyper-vigilant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're hyper vigilant, and you know you're trying to stay one step ahead of the filmmakers. And I think in the case of the Scream films, the filmmakers are one step ahead of the audience. I mean, they have to be, and it wouldn't be such an enduring and endearing franchise if it didn't deliver. Like the audience, it has to surprise. I mean, you're 6 films in, and you're still able to surprise an audience, which
yeah.
I think is good. And you know, the movies was really really successful. Did you have? I mean, I got to ask you about Jenna Ortega because you know she had her moment. You know, she's everyone's Goo Goo Mock. I don't think was a song anybody would have ever really remembered
No.
anymore until she's suddenly. I mean,
Yeah.
going from the previous film and then into this movie. I mean, she's kind of become a superstar, especially amongst the crowd that embraces horror. Being that she's
For
now
sure.
Wednesday Adams. Did you feel any? Was there any kind of? I don't know. I mean, what had Wednesday come out when you were shooting? Was she
No, I think she had just finished it and she came straight there, if I remember correctly. But
right?
in her fittings, she told me sort of lots of stories about working on it and how much fun she had on it. And working with her, you know, you meet every type of person in costume fitting, and
Sure.
you often can tell the people that have it, the people who are going to make it. And I mean, I think she was a star before Wednesday in the
Right.
making. Really, like, I mean, she's a star in the Scream franchise, but she's one of those people that, like, she's, you know, she's very, very, very intelligent. She's got sort of the number one on the call sheet energy. She just has that thing. But she's very humble. She's very, very lovely.
But
And I'm
knowing that,
excited.
when you can see that in someone, how does that inform your choices in terms of knowing that a person has that? So you've got the character as described in the script. Then you have the actor who you get to play this role. She's coming back, but knowing she has, like you said, that star energy, first on the call sheet energy, does that affect your choices in terms of costume design? Do you play to that energy and the character, or do you just ignore that and just play the character as they're described in the script?
Well, I think so. To speak more to the number one on the call sheet attitude, someone who is number one on the call sheet gravitates always to the item on the rack that is best for the character.
Oh,
Other people gravitate to the items that they like, if that makes
wow!
sense.
No, wow. You know what? That is what an interesting insight. I haven't heard that. Now that's really
Or,
clever. No, that's
yeah.
really interesting. So, in
It's like you're here to make the movie you're here to embody a character. You're not here to wear the thing that you think is the coolest and looks best on you. You're here to play a part and to embody. That's my experience, at least, with actors.
that's amazing, but that sort of means that actors have to be secure in knowing what they're there to
Yeah.
do. You know,
Well,
that
it's
kind
like,
of goes against the conventional wisdom that all these, actors are all insecure in a
oh
way.
no, there's that are she's very confident in her. um she knows her character well. And
Does that mean you guys
um
have more of an opportunity to play? Does that make it easier for you because knowing you're working with an actor that's in you guys can have character conversations and make does that open up the
sure.
creativity between an actor and you?
Yeah, because I think they're willing to take a risk, right? Like,
Right.
people who are willing to try things that are not something that they might necessarily gravitate towards in their personal life. They're willing to take a risk to become something other than themselves.
Right, which is what you'd hope all actors would want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be my. That's really interesting. So when you collectively, I'm curious because I want to get into Painkiller too because that's a big ensemble cast. But when you're dealing with an ensemble cast in like a Scream movie, where everything I guess can be a little bit heightened, but now you're working with an ensemble and you've got multiple characters on screen at the same time. do you then have to come up with an overall color palette for each character so when they're put together, the differences in those characters' palettes look better on screen? Is that
Yeah. Yeah.
and how do you?
Yeah.
So you're designing not just so you're designing for the actor, you're designing for the character and the script, but then you also have to design for the mise en scène, the frame itself when you get all these characters together. And how then does that affect, like when you're creating an ensemble and this, it's stylized, it's horror, you can play with it a little bit more. Is that a hard thing to do?
For sure it is, especially the other part of it that's really tricky sometimes is, can you even get the multiples of the color you want?
Right.
There's a lot of dying that happened on screen for me. Especially in a pandemic, like we were still in the thick of stuff, so it wasn't super easy to get things, but I try to always hash out kind of a palette for each character and then shopping around that palette, which makes that slightly easier. But sometimes you have a palette in mind and the actor comes in and it's like, oh, that color I thought would look great on you looks horrible on you. I don't care. My whole palette goes out the window, and it's like I want the actor to look and feel as best as possible. So, you like everything in film are constantly pivoting. But yeah, I definitely. Well, and also blood. What's going to show up on blood?
Right, I was gonna. Yeah.
I don't like using white when it comes to working with blood, because I feel like it is, if you are a horror fan or anyone who knows anything about filmmaking, at least for me, the minute I see white on someone in a horror film, I'm like, you're getting killed. So to me, it's like a costume target on their back. So I try to avoid.
Well, that's really interesting.
Couldn't help that in Ready or Not.
Right. Well, yeah.
But dress. But I think, yeah, I mean, palette is where I start with everything. That's one of my favorite parts of my job is composition with color. So yeah.
As far as the Scream franchise is concerned, are there go-to colors and fabrics, or can you do anything?
I call it Tatum Lime, which is in the first film there was a lot of sort of that limey green, and also I think Gail's suit, she had a Versace suit, I think, in the first one. I tried to really bring that color through. So yeah, to me that's like your most quintessential Scream color. And silver, for whatever reason. Well, I guess chrome face maybe, or chrome Ghostface, but
right.
But yeah, that color to me signifies Scream.
I like that. Now, obviously, you're the killer, the Ghostface killer. You're kind of locked in. Not only are you locked into the Ghostface, it's you can't really. There's no deviation from that. Was there any talk in this one about doing something with, or have there been different variations of Ghostface that we might not know about, like in terms of maybe the kind of fabric used for the black, or do you have to, what is the Ghostface costume philosophy? Because in this movie there's a lot of I mean the kills are pretty vicious, and it's this
one was maybe the most violent one yet, in my opinion. So the original costume was actually a drawstring closure.
Okay.
Which was actually a bit of a problem for us for when Melissa at the end, well, it was, and then it changed, but because at the end she was originally, I think, you were going to see her take the robe off, but because she was wearing the robe from the original movie, it has to go over the head, which we didn't realize until we'd done all of that extensive research.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to find the exact fabric that they used from the beginning. A lot of people don't realize there's actually like it's like a lurex kind of fabric that's woven through it, and it's shiny, it's glittery. If you're a real Scream fan, you know that.
Wow.
Yeah, which was really smart because, if I'll use black velvet as an example, when you use black velvet on camera, it often makes kind of like a black hole
Yeah.
On camera. And I think that that's what they were fearful of in the original. And that's just an assumption, but from my technical logic, I would assume that's why they had glitter on it to make it not be just a big black void of Ghostface.
Yeah, because then you can't even see the detail as the costume is moving.
Yeah. So, but the hem has kind of changed in every film, and then of course the closure has updated over time. The first one, it was a full like glove attached to the sleeve kind of situation. In 5, Emily Gunshore the designer did gloves, and then it's an attachment, and the guys really loved what she did, so they wanted to really maintain the integrity of that, so we updated it just a little bit to put a little spin on it, because every single robe has been different, and I felt like it was really important to continue that tradition. I didn't want to mess with the chi of the franchise.
I like that.
Yeah,
the chi of the franchise. Every franchise has one.
They do. And then, yeah, so that's kind of the Coles notes of it. And I think for this one, what the guys liked about what Emily had done in the last one is it felt their whole thing about Ghostface is he needs to feel as domineering and anonymous as possible. So the more space he can take up, the better. So that was kind of the directive, if you will.
Was it difficult working with COVID protocols? Did you find that frustrating?
Not really. I was so used to it by that point.
Oh, that's good.
That I was like, well, I guess this is life as we know it now. But it definitely was. It was more frustrating for shopping. I think that's like the hardest part. They weren't making people quarantine anymore in Canada, which was a huge problem in the past for costume, in my opinion. So that was a delight, but no, I was pretty used to it. So.
Well, it was a great film, a lot of fun, really reinvigorated the franchise. Your two directors, they're so great. I mean, do you just call them by their first names? I mean, do you get to call them Matt and Tyler?
Yes, I do. Yeah. They're normal people.
Right. I didn't know if they like to be called something else on set for everyone else,
Yeah. Maybe I'll make that happen.
Yeah, come up with some kind of a Benifer thing or something. They need that celebrity thing. Well, you jumped ahead. You jumped from Scream, which is a pretty big ensemble cast, to another big ensemble cast, which is the upcoming Painkiller. That's a 6-episode miniseries.
Yep, which I actually made before Scream. It just hasn't come out yet.
Oh, I didn't. Okay, all right, didn't know that. But like Dope Sick, this delves into the opioid crisis from many different angles, many different aspects. It stars Matthew Broderick. I'm really excited to see this, only because I don't know why I love stories about drugs and drug companies and epidemics. I just always have. But and this is kind of in the zeitgeist again. People have been talking about this. So tell us how you got involved in Painkiller, and again, obviously there's a lot of reality in this. Where do you begin? I mean, this has a sprawling cast of characters, and it's going to be on Netflix starting this month, I think
August 10th.
Yeah, August 10th. So we're going to say hopefully we'll get this interview out So tell us
Yeah.
all about it. What was it like to get onto Painkiller, and did you know the directors of this? How'd you get the gig?
How did so Chris Hatcher, who's one of the producers, is a line producer that I've worked with before, and I had done a television series called Sex Life with him before.
Oh yeah.
And I was designing 8-Bit Christmas when he called me and said that Pete Berg was coming to town to do this project. And he wanted me to meet with him if I was interested. And I was pretty tired and burnt out because I hadn't taken a break
Mm.
in COVID, but I was, sort of the mindset of I can't do anything else, so I may as well work. And also, I was really interested in the story and working with Pete. So I read the scripts, and they were some of the most beautifully written scripts I've ever read. I
Wow.
have a family member who has struggled on and off with opioids for a very long time. And something I learned while I was making the project is most people have someone in their life that struggles with it. So that was something that really drew me to it. And then it's also set over four eras: the 50s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s.
Oh wow.
And on top of that, um, you see sort of it's a really great reflection on, in my opinion, where we are in society. You see America from all angles in this project in terms of the ultra wealthy, the ultra poor, the middle class, the struggling, the affluent, greed, generosity. It felt like nothing I'd ever read before.
Wow.
It has
Okay.
been obviously compared to Dope Sick, because it's a similar,
But
obviously,
Dope Sick didn't cover the
story.
sprawling that those four
No,
multiple or 5 decades if you skip the
yeah, and the
6.
eras of, you know, of Purdue Pharma coming to be the backstory of Arthur Sackler, who created Purdue Pharma. He was a doctor, but he also owned a pharmaceutical company, and he owned like a marketing company that marketed drugs.
Mm.
He actually, if I remember correctly, was responsible for the success of Valium, and that marketing campaign. So there's a big history there of advertising and big pharma and
Right.
all that delightful stuff.
Well, you had, I mean, this is a big job in terms of history. How much
Yeah.
prep time, once you delved into the script, did you find it intimidating? And how much prep time did you get to create these different eras?
I think, if I remember correctly, I had 10 weeks of prep.
Now, is that a lot for a project like this, or did you want more?
I actually was pretty okay prep wise on this project because the although there's a big scene that I won't spoil that I don't think is actually in it anymore. I just watched all the episodes and I'm like, did I miss it? But I prepped this massive scene. But no, yes and no. I wish I had more prep time, but the thing that was challenging about this project was the sheer amount of characters. I think I had over 700 principal costumes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and over 4,000 extras that were costumed. But it was the magnitude of characters, and often you can't really prep all of that so far out because you don't have casting.
Right,
So,
sure. Yeah.
um, yes and no. And also Pete always starts later. Like he doesn't do a heavy prep. He's the fastest director I've worked with and very in and out in
Wow,
terms
okay.
of like this is what I want, this is how we're going to do it. Like let's not make things complicated. So yeah, it was definitely needed a lot of prep because of the different eras, and also so much organization of, you know, separating the different eras, making sure we weren't using, you know, one thing on one of the Sackler brothers that was meant for this. Like, it was just a lot of logistics, which costume it always is, but it was particularly challenging in that way.
Right. And I should point out that that's director Peter Berg, who
Yes.
has a long history. He's made a lot of great stuff. Whenever Peter Berg's name is mentioned, I always bring up the fact that he was in a wonderful time travel movie, a unique time travel movie that not a lot of people have seen, called Late for Dinner.
Oh.
And if you ever get a chance to see it, he's really good in it, but he's quite a good director. And
He
I'm
is.
a big fan
He really
of his.
knows tension really well. He's also in Wes Craven's Shocker.
Right. Yes, he
and
is.
When I did Scream, I was like, we have to do a Shocker nod. So there's a couple. There's some Shocker characters on the subway in Scream.
And then,
but yeah,
is that how he brought on Taylor Kitsch? You know, Chris Riggins, because they worked together on Friday Night Lights. You know, he's produced, he directed.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. I think so. I think they have a long history together.
Yeah.
I need to watch them on set because they're like brothers.
Oh yeah.
It was very fun to watch.
Yeah, that's it's they're what a duo they are. But you know.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, no, Pete was great. It was the first time I think I had ever worked with a new director that I didn't have an existing relationship with, that was very much, well, what do you want? In terms of, like, I would present him stuff. Yeah, he was very, very, it was sort of like, do whatever you want, and if I don't like it, I'll just tell you, which was, it's not often the case anymore. So it was very liberating in a way for me. I felt like I relearned my taste and opinion of what I like, instead of, you know, looking through the eyes of who you're working for constantly. So
sure.
That was very nice.
And of course, you know, Peter and they worked on Battleship together too. He was the principal on that. So
yeah.
Now, okay, on something like this, you've got multiple eras, call them eras, decades. How many multiples on something like this do you have to make? And because you're with all these different, I mean, like you said, all the extras, there's so many different details. The research for something like this has to be incredible. And
yeah,
were there styles at the time? Like, did you have go-to designers of that, whatever era you were looking at, that you tended to gravitate towards?
Yeah, I mean, I also looked at the project. We block shot all 6 episodes at once.
That's insane.
It was one of the craziest projects I've ever worked on in terms of logistics and just.
If you could explain to the folks at home, what does that mean for you, block shooting a project?
Back in the day, you'd shoot 1 episode at a time. Now, to save money, we often will block shoot 2 episodes at a time. But if you're lucky, you'll shoot all 6 at once.
Oh my God.
Based generally on actor availability and locations. So if you are going to a location multiple times in a series, you will often shoot everything at that one location in a day or within a week or however much time you need to be there. But that means for us, if you have, say, a story that takes place where you go somewhere 10 times on 10 different script days, you need all 10 outfits to shoot that day. So it can.
That's a really nightmare. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, your continuity is a nightmare. That I would not want to do that. That would be tough.
Oh, I have to get very annoyed and frustrated about it, and then after 20 minutes, I'm like, well, better get back to work and suck it up. But no, I'm not a fan of block shooting. But you know, the Purdue Pharma offices, we block shot all of that, and that takes place over like years and years and years. So that was a week of block shooting.
So were you dealing with people that looked like they were in business suits, and then you had to go over because obviously I haven't seen it yet, but going over decades with different suits,
Yeah.
was that fun? Because that sounded like might be fun to me.
I loved it. The part of it that the part of it that was really frustrating for me is I love neckties. Like it's one of my favorite parts of my job. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with neckties, but managing the necktie stock and making sure that the ties from this era didn't end up in because you hope that you get crew when you have dailies come in and organize stock after a big extras day that actually know the eras, but sometimes you don't. So but yeah, we joked, my crew, that it was actually, we were shooting 4 feature films because there's basically 4 storylines.
Yeah.
In the so it was a lot. It's the biggest undertaking I think I've ever done, and something that I'm also the most proud of.
Wow.
But
okay.
Yeah, I loved, we did the suiting, and then part of it is set in the Appalachians. So lots of just sort of, middle class American types in the 90s, 2000s. And then, yeah, you kind of go everywhere. It's like this, it's sort of a bit of a roller coaster project. You just
wow.
go all over.
But like you said, I mean, it's challenging definitely for your department. How many people do you have working for you on this?
I think 22.
Wow. Now,
yeah.
So did you have enough people, or would you have wanted more?
We kept adding more, I think, because it just was like growing and growing. I should have had 2 assistants from the start, and I didn't. And I think about a month into filming, I had a second one. So yeah.
Wow, that's tough. But it sounds like you had a good time, though. I mean, as far as
it was. It also just felt like the train was leaving, and if you took one swift move, like you had to stay on the train to keep it, because Pete also shoots so fast. I remember when I saw the one line when we were in prep, and I was like, what planet are these people on? This is crazy. There's no way we're going to make these days. And then like the first day we finished filming in like 8 hours or something like crazy short. And I was like, oh, like this is what he wants. This is how, like, the man's got a vision. So,
yeah.
You had to have a lot of scenes prepped because he was able to hammer it out in a very short amount of time.
Did they shoot multiple cameras? Do you remember? Yeah, that's because that's kind of his style. He certainly pioneered that with Friday Night Lights. I thought that was both the movie and the TV show. I thought he did a great job with that.
He wanted this, something he told me from the start was he wanted this to feel like a documentary. And he very much shoots handheld.
Yep. Yeah.
Like big handheld energy. I think there was like one day with a dolly.
Wow.
With that.
Yeah, I mean, I love his style. I thought it really worked. And like with Friday Night Lights, they were shooting 16 millimeter. The TV show, not which looked incredible.
You feel like you're there, you're experiencing it with the person when you shoot it that way, which he really captures well.
So that's going to be August 10th, Netflix. All 6 episodes drop at once because it's Netflix, I would imagine. So that's exciting. Yeah, well, Avery, now, can people find you on social media?
Yep. It is just my name, Avery Plewes. On Instagram, I don't have Twitter anymore.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
You mean X? There is no Twitter anymore. It's X.
Yeah, X or whatever it's called. Yeah. When that stuff started, I was like, I'm done here. So.
Yeah. Maybe he'll go to make it. It'll be XXX soon. Who knows?
That's actually my husband on XXX.
Did you really?
Return to Xander Cage.
Yeah, to Xander Cage. That's hilarious.
XXX bill, yeah.
So they can find you on. Now, I would ask you this. Our final question that we always ask everybody is, with the changing state of the industry, a lot of people probably might still want to be getting into costume design. Is there any advice that you can provide to young people who want to follow in your footsteps?
What would I tell someone? I feel like I give a lot of advice. I would give the advice that someone gave me when I first started, which was be a sponge instead of trying to provide information to other people, and instead of trying to prove yourself to other people, observe and absorb the information around you, because you'll learn way more that way. I guess that's if you're working in the industry, but I would work at a costume rental house.
Wow. Okay.
That's you'll learn the history, and you'll meet everyone there. So, yeah.
Well, that's great advice. Well, I love that. Well, Avery Plewes, it was so good to speak with you again, and we look forward to. I mean, Scream 6. I already own it. I own that movie.
Great.
But and I mean the new film coming out, or the new miniseries coming out is very exciting. I look forward to seeing it. And again, that is Painkiller, and it debuts on August 10th on Netflix. Well, Avery, I want to thank you for being here once again on the Designing Hollywood podcast. And thanks very much to our sponsor for this episode of the Designing Hollywood show, the Costume Rentals Corporation. The variety of costumes at Costumes Rentals Corporation is expansive. CRC is recognized worldwide as the premier supplier of military and police costumes and uniform rentals. Costumes Rentals Corporation takes pride in its commitment to each customer, helping to produce the type of exceptional look needed for a successful production. A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from the John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeekSingularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.